Hey folks, and welcome to this bonus episode of the Scottish History Podcast. This episode is actually part 2 of the 2-part collaboration that I did with This'll Do Nicely. So if you've heard part 1 but not yet heard part 2, here it is for you. However, if of course you've already heard part 2, here it is for you to listen to again, just in case you want to. So here we go. This'll Do Nicely and the Scottish History Podcast, talking all about Halloween.
Welcome to the Scottish Podcast by Scottish people about Scottish things. We're 3 lifelong friends and displaced Scotsmen who get together to talk about our homeland, the weird stuff that happens there, and to remind us why we are the way we are. Welcome to This'll Do Nicely. Hello everybody and welcome to today's story with Rory. We're doing spooky stories today. We are collaborating with the Scottish History Podcast. We have Owen Innes with us today. Say hello, Owen.
Hello.
Hello. We also have Johnny as always.
Hello.
And Chris.
Hello.
Hello. Okay, everybody, if you have not listened to the first half of this episode, because we're doing a split episode across 2 streams. Yeah, we're that funky, we're that new, we're that cool. So go back and find the first half of this episode on Owen's Scottish History Podcast stream. Listen to that. And then come back to this one, because we're doing a split episode where we're talking about Halloween, how the Scots invented it, and we're telling some spooky Scottish stories. We're doing scary monsters, we're doing ghost stories, we're doing the like. So stop whatever you're doing, put it down, stop the car, just don't even pull over, just slam on the brakes right now, find the Scottish History Podcast and start downloading.
Yeah, delete this episode. Delete this episode right now.
Because
you'll spoil it. You'll spoil it for yourselves. Go back to Owen's episode.
Hey,
and then come back and re-download this episode. And
Chris, we need them.
Also download download the Iron Brew episode as well, and any others that you like.
And then find a friend's phone and download all episodes onto their phone. And also subscribe, find your parents' phones and subscribe to our podcast on their phones as well. Otherwise, you won't understand what the rest of this episode means.
Only listen to this particular podcast if you're the type of person who always reads the last page of a book before you read the rest of the book.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know if that entirely made sense, but yes, what Owen just said.
Does make sense. Also,
I hope it makes sense, because if not, then I just need to leave.
There's a little 5-star button that unlocks this episode, so if you just hit that button first, you should be able to listen to it afterwards.
Yes, let's do that.
Plus, this is for all our readers as well, isn't it?
Yes, all the readers out there.
All the readers.
Yes.
Oh.
Okay, so once you've done all of that, once you've followed our airtight instructions, you're ready to listen to this episode where we're going to tell you 3 spooky Scottish Halloween stories. We're going to start with the very scary, the very disturbing Johnny Naismith.
I get that
Johnny.
I get that more than I'd like.
Can I just say that the spooky thing here is that Johnny's actually done preparation for a change.
Yeah, that's what's terrifying.
Look, it's got to happen once a year, and this seemed like the perfect moment. I was kind of freaked out by Rory's story, if you hear it in the last episode. So I'm trying to bring a bit of decorum back to here, and in honour of Owen and the Scottish History Podcast, I've got a little bit of mystery and a little bit of history.
Ooh, that's very good.
Yeah. See, that's the research I did. I just wrote a line.
See, when you do it, you're good. This is the annoying thing.
He's just going to start talking about Tunnock's tea cakes again, and it's going to be... You guys are going to be bamboozled by it, but I had to listen to the bloody thing.
We got on really well in that episode. It's fine.
Yeah, well, I heard that episode about Local Hero, and now I don't know where I stand.
Well, we're all back, which is great, and we're now 4 people with this episode, which is very exciting. So, my story, I'd like to take you to Glasgow. So, obviously a place very dear to my heart, where I'm from. and a place in the East End called the Necropolis, which is a Victorian cemetery right by the Glasgow Cathedral. Opened in 1833. There's something like 50,000 people buried there. And if you've ever visited, or if you haven't visited, it's in itself, the location is as spooky as it gets. It's sort of this, built around this kind of hill in the East End of Glasgow. And it's got these pathways that sort of maze their way up the hill, and it's surrounded by quite creepy gravestones. It's got these sort of looming tombs that are all like lit by the darkness when you go there. And there's a lot of rumours about, the statues there, their eyes are, they follow you around of their own accord, the sort of disembodied voices and whispers you hear amidst all the gravestones. And actually, even the new Batman film, I think, was shot there, the one with Robert Pattinson. So it's got
really?
the brooding and intimidating credentials. So the perfect scene for like a dark story. And actually, I read this great quote where I was reading a bit about the Necropolis. It's sort of this very architecturally interesting place. And Billy Connolly said, Glasgow's a bit like Nashville. It doesn't care much for the living, but it really looks after the dead. Which I really liked. And it's at this point in the story, when I was doing my bit of research, that I realised that this is not the Necropolis in the story that I'm about to tell you. So that was a slight bummer, but
wait, so it's just another necropolis?
Yes, but not very far away. So in Glasgow, there's another one slightly further south called the Southern Necropolis. So we're not leaving too far, but I thought it was funny because I was like, "Oh, this place is perfect. I've been there. I know about it." And then I started reading. I was like, "Oh, it's a different one. Never mind."
Glasgow has many necropolis.
Yeah, well, two at least. I think. I don't think there's many more. Necropolises. Yeah.
Necropolis. Skeletal.
Yeah.
You're going to have to listen to the first episode to get that joke.
Skeletor and He-Man.
He-Man.
So we pick up the tale in the south side. So just south of the river, there's an area called the Gorbals in the south of Glasgow. And it's here where the story sort of starts to revolve around. So there's a rumour going around the Gorbals, and this is back in the 50s really, that it started to gather a lot of traction, about the Gorbals vampire, which was a sort of child-eating monster that, roamed the streets of the south side. It was 7 feet tall, it was monstrous and had blood-red eyes, it had a mouth full of razor-sharp teeth made of iron. And so of all the local schools, and, at the time there was, people in very close-knit communities in the tenements in the south side of Glasgow. And there was all these rumours about this 7 foot tall monster chasing children through the streets, taking them back to its lair and eating them with its iron teeth. And as you can imagine, in Glasgow, where gossip moves fast, this travelled the schools, the playgrounds, the homes of people there. And got to a particular, this is where I think it turns into a bit of history, but it built to this interesting climax where the story started to circulate that 2 local boys had been killed and eaten by the vampire. And obviously, as kids do...
Like fully eaten?
Eaten alive.
Good gravy.
So they were taken back to its lair, which was apparently in the Southern Necropolis, and eaten. And so, I think at the same time, there wasn't really any reports of any missing children. So it sort of plays into a lot of rumour mill of Scottish folk when they're young, meeting in the streets, playing football, hanging around graveyards, and these things tend to spread.
You haven't seen
quickly.
Jimmy in a week, so he's obviously been eaten by a vampire.
Exactly. It's the obvious conclusion you get to pretty fast. And so very quickly plans were made in the playgrounds of local schools, to the point at which on this particular dark night in September 1954 in Glasgow, Scotland, basically an army of school children, between about 5 and 12, stormed the necropolis, stormed the graveyard.
This is amazing.
In a hunt for the vampire, which I just think is absolutely a brilliant story. So there's these load of kids armed with, sticks and penknives and their dog and whatever else they can find.
I think you just described the Little Rascals, Johnny.
Yeah, exactly. And
this is like It. This is Stephen King's It.
I just think it's so brilliant.
But better.
Yeah. And with just the amazing attitude of Gorbals' children, yeah. And I mean, I literally think there's just hundreds of kids. And so, I mean, there was a quote I read of this guy going like, "Oh, I think that the whole of the Gorbals was in that graveyard that night." Which I love the picture of them being lit. You know, there was like a local steelworks nearby, and I think, you know, the smoke and the light from there was sort of lighting the graves, and, you know, shadows were darting. So every time anyone saw anything, you know, it was like, the vampire's here, and just this horde of like hundreds of tiny children chasing a vampire through a cemetery. I think.
So
it's
did he kill the vampire? Did they get him?
No, he got away. So this happened for 3 consecutive nights, and it took. So the police showed up the first night and couldn't shift them, and it took the 2 things that can defeat a Scots. Well, maybe not. Is rain and a head teacher to like clear the clear the cemetery, which I thought was just brilliant. And so they left after these 3. This became a kind of hysterical moment in the South Side, and they left without having found or captured said vampire of the Gorbals. So perhaps they're still roaming out there. Perhaps they're still eating children. I mean, who knows, really?
Well, this was only. I'm currently reading a book about Bible John, so maybe there's a connection there.
Yeah,
you know, it was only a few years before when Bible John started preying on the innocent.
On a new persona and, you know, reinventing himself.
Interesting.
I'd like to commend you, Johnny, for having a more wholesome story there compared to Rory's porn, basically, from the earlier episode.
If I've learned anything from you, Chris, this is a no-nonsense podcast, and I just think it's time to bring it back down to earth.
Yeah, enough. And
he was talking about children being eaten.
Yeah, but they did it in a wholesome way. They all banded together.
Yeah, it's a feel-good story.
Yeah.
He basically watched The Lost Boys and then reset it in Glasgow and then passed it off as his own story.
I didn't pick up on that. I picked up on it being just a wholesome child story.
Thanks, Chris.
Like Stranger Things or, you know, The Sandlot or Hook.
I mean, it's been turned into a play at the Citizen Theatre, so it's got something about it.
Yeah, and Rory, yours was turned into a documentary on Babe Station, right?
Oh, that's brilliant. So just to round out the end of this, it actually became like quite a big story, and there was it made it into like the Sunday Mirror, the Daily Mail, the Daily Record, all ran stories about this hysteria in Glasgow about the vampire. And actually that caused obviously a bit of an uproar, and people started to investigate, you know, what's like, is there this sort of worry about the kind of moral welfare of our children? Like, why are they chasing vampires around the streets and like building armies to chase them into a cemetery? And after a bit of investigation, it turned out that there was basically an American comic book at the time that was being imported into the UK called Dark Mysteries. And there was a story in one of those comics called The Vampire with the Iron Teeth. And so they were like, well, actually, this filth from America has been brought in and corrupting our children. It's leading them astray and causing them to be doing all sorts of stuff. And actually led to a campaign where they created an act in Parliament called the Children and Young Persons Harmful Publications Act that sort of prevented certain like things that were portraying violence or crimes or incidents that are repulsive in different ways, that it became a sort of criminal act in the end.
Wow.
And
That's
so
nonsense.
It's just the kind of, I thought it was really, I mean, it's not so much a ghost story, but I just thought, one, it's so interesting that it's set in this very quite spooky bit of Glasgow anyway, but also just the idea that it says a lot about the Scottish spirit, right? That, you know, you hear about this child killing vampire and they're like, oh, we're not having that around here. And they're sort of banded together.
So we're going to send out our kids to go and fight it.
Yeah, it's like, oh no, you can't have that here, mate. No, sort that out.
Fucking glass you.
Yeah, it's sort of so brazen. I love it.
If Joe Cornish doesn't end up directing the film version of this, then you know, what's the point?
Yeah, exactly.
That's an amazing story. That's genuinely brilliant. I had no idea any of that. That's very
yeah.
Very
do you know? I'd never heard it. I studied at the art school in Glasgow, and we once did a drawing thing where we had to go to the necropolis and draw. And I remember us all being a bit like, man, this is quite a spooky place. But I'd never heard this story about it, and I just thought,
well, you were at the wrong necropolis, weren't you? You were at
yeah, obviously the wrong one. Yeah, my mistake.
Necropoli. Johnny, that was phenomenal. I genuinely genuinely enjoyed that. That was I kind of got lost in that for a wee bit. That was a lot of fun.
There you go.
Owen, you're up. You wanna take the seat? Tell us something else spooky about Scotland.
Well, this is a story as well in a way that was requested way back when I first started the podcast as well. I'd never heard of the story up until that point, so
remind because you're on now our feed, so remind the listeners what podcast is that?
That's the Scottish History Podcast, available on all good podcasting websites. We even have our own website, scotthistorypod.com, because money.
I hear that internet thing's a big deal these days.
Oh man, the internet is like, it was so amazing. There was genuinely once I was talking to somebody. I'm not going to name what country they were from, but it's somewhere quite close to where you are. And they did genuinely once ask me, do you have the internet there? When we were talking via the internet.
I've had a very, very similar experience myself in an AOL chat room once. Yeah, back when I was living in Scotland. It was disappointing, to say the least.
Do you even know what television is? It's like, yeah, we invented it.
Yeah, but you can say that about literally everything.
Near enough. The only thing that I think the Scots haven't invented, which I'm really disappointed we didn't, was Twinkies.
Yeah, seems a missed opportunity there because it seems very us.
It does.
I don't know. Give me like 30 minutes on Google. I could create a link.
Oh, that's one of my favourite things about Scotland as well, and Scottish people, is the fact that we could literally link almost anything into being Scottish.
We invented it. All right, so it was something that was requested on your podcast.
Yes, and it's the story of Sony Bean. So Sony Bean was born in East Lothian, which is on the east coast of Scotland, in probably the late 1500s. There's a bit of controversy about when he was born. So Sony Bean's father was a ditch digger and a hedge trimmer, but Sony wasn't cut out for this kind of work. One day he meets and falls in love with Black Agnes Douglas, a woman widely believed to be a witch. The pair are then forced to move from the east of the country and finally settled in a sea cave on the west country at Benan Head in Ayrshire. Now, I hope I pronounced that right. It's either Benan or Benane.
Rory, was there a massacre there that on either side that you would like to get each family wrong?
Yeah, I would get it wrong. Yeah, probably. Like, don't worry. Like, we're very loose with the pronunciations
and facts.
Accuracy.
Yeah. Liberal.
Yes. Yeah,
that's all good. So they made their lives as such, living in the cave through robbing passing travellers. Things then turned to murdering these travellers also, and then eating their flesh.
Oy.
So they became cannibals. Lovely.
That escalated fast, didn't it?
Yeah, that's a real quick escalation to like robbing. I mean, if you're going to steal their stuff, why do you then need to eat them?
I think their whole plan was that they would rob these people, but they didn't want to. They didn't fit into the town because obviously Black Agnes was like considered to be a witch. So if anybody was to see her or catch her or whatever, then bad things would happen. So,
I mean, that sounds like an excuse to me. I feel there's a workaround before you have to start eating people. But okay.
So the cave that they lived in was blocked at high tide by the sea. So Sony and Agnes managed to lay undiscovered for over 25 years. During this time, however, body parts and bones regularly washed up on the beaches surrounding their cave. However, no one could give a reasonable explanation as to what happened, apart from perhaps some form of animal was preying on these travelling travellers. So their work and diet certainly kept them happy enough to live where they did, and soon they started having children. In all, they had 8 sons and 6 daughters, who then in turn incestually produced 18 grandsons and 14 granddaughters.
Jeez.
This is not going to get like us billing on visitscotland.com.
Most definitely not. Most definitely not.
Yeah,
This
but
is
I
not
mean,
painting a
Fritzl's
good
got
picture.
Fritzl's got a great podcast. It's Fritz will do nicely.
That's so wrong.
Yeah. It's a spooky podcast. It's fine.
It's Halloween. It's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, so as a family, the Sony Bean, or the Bean family, then came to start salting and pickling their collected human flesh using the nearby seawater. Their fate was settled when on one day they attacked a married couple. The man was able to fight off his attackers, but the Bean family had already killed his wife. Then another load of travellers came over the hill and witnessed the scene. The Bean family scattered back to their cave and took the survivor to the authorities. So the other travellers found the man, took him to the authorities, reported them and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then so the only thing that really dates the story is apparently King James VI of Scotland, and who then became King James I of England as well. Apparently he found out about it, and he himself apparently led the search party in the area to go and find the Bean family's cave. And
Well, they're only like round the corner from him, basically. Like where the castle is. It's not far away. When I say round the corner, it's obviously like a few miles away, but like they're relatively close to the castle, right?
Well, I think King James VI was more based in Stirling. This is like way off in the west coast.
Oh, okay. I mean, that's why you go to the Scottish History podcast.
Yeah,
for
Rory, I was going to
actual-
say, I mean, seriously, taking on the wrong person here.
I've not
Come on,
really.
Stirling's basically a suburb of Edinburgh to all our American listeners, right?
It's closer to Glasgow, mate.
Also a suburb of Glasgow. You know, let's not be picky.
To be honest, the Central Belt is basically Glasgow. Glasgow ends, and then it becomes Edinburgh. So
Yeah.
Exactly.
that's the way I look at it.
I mean, what's the point in between, right? Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much.
I think that's exactly what we're saying.
Unsubscribe. So did he catch them?
So yeah,
Did he catch the beans?
They basically ended up finding the cave, and inside the cave they found parts of bodies and barrels filled with pickling flesh and mountains of the stolen jewellery that they'd stolen from the travellers over the years.
Spend it. Spend it on actual
what-
food.
what a
Spend it
life.
on some beans.
All that money and you're still living in a cave.
But
Yeah.
you know, there's like, if there's food just walking past your house, you know, you're not gonna.
I feel like at that point it's just become kind of counterculture. Like they're into it and they can't get
Yeah.
out of it now. Like it's just part of like their shtick.
I don't think they were happy. I don't think they were happy. You know,
No, neither do I.
I think they were searching for something.
Yeah, I think they probably had some sort of trouble in their childhood and they just never got over it. Probably a bad relationship with their father or mother. You know, hugged too much or too little.
Tragic,
from-
if anything.
And yet,
From the sort of little information about like especially Sony Bean, was that he was quite a sort of a tormented sort of young man. I mean, most serial killers all tend to be kind of, you know, tormented in
true.
some way and do some
true.
weird stuff when they're kids and that. So they were all arrested and then taken to the Tolbooth jail in Edinburgh. In the following days, it was decided that no trial should be held. So they didn't even stand trial for any of their crimes. Instead, they were seen as being unhuman. And they jumped straight to execution.
Wow.
Absolutely no question about it.
Was that when they all
So-
became has-beens?
I wonder if they became beans on toast.
that's very good.
Jesus.
So I like the gory sort of details in stories like this. I mean, if anyone's sort of like listened to my like William Wallace stories and stuff like that, I go full on. So basically, the men's form of execution was they all had their genitals, hands, and feet cut off, which was then burned on a fire, and the bodies were basically just left there to bleed to death. After which, the women were then burned at the stake.
Oh, lovely stuff.
Man, they really went to town back then, didn't they? I mean, Wallace was similar, right?
Yeah, it's meant, and that was so like as far as I know, that was the sort of thing for treason. So like back in the day, for treason, you'd be hung, drawn, and quartered. Whereas obviously with these guys, they wanted them to suffer as much as possible. And also it's easier to cut things off than it is to go through the whole hanging and
Sure.
So, especially if you think, what was it, 18 grandsons, 8 sons, and Sony to kind of execute in one day, and then with all of the other kids as well, and the wife to execute, that would have taken quite a long time. So,
that's so messy.
It's brutal, like. And apparently, Sonny's last words before he died was, "It's not over. It will never be over," which is just creepy as
haunting.
Ominous.
Yeah. I actually know. Well, I know a wee bit about Sony Bean because he and his family are what's the word I'm looking for? Like
relatives.
Yes, but they're represented in the Edinburgh dungeons. So if you were to go to Edinburgh, you go to the dungeons, you hear a wee bit about Sony Bean. And I was there a long time ago now. I want to say like 8-9 years ago. And it was there for my nephew's birthday, and he would have been maybe 7 years old at the time. And we went to Edinburgh Dungeons. It was me, a friend, my nephew, my mum, and my sister, his mum. And we went through, and it was all genuinely fine until we got to the Sony Bean part. And there's a part where you're kind of standing in the room and you're telling the story, and they jump out, like there's people playing Sony Bean and his family kind of jump out of like fake caves, obviously, in the dungeons above you and start like screaming and yelling. And my nephew crapped himself. Like, was just terrified. He should never have been in there. He was way too young, but he had to be like taken out by his grandma. No. And like, and it was just like, it was his birthday. It was like, oh, like I just remember looking at my sister being like, "You're a terrible mother."
Definitely
like,
memorable.
Yeah. He was back there, I think, last year and went to the Edinburgh Dungeons, and I think it was like almost like a coming of age thing of like, I can do this now. I can
face down these ghouls.
I vaguely remember going through the London dungeon, or maybe it was Madame Tussauds, and they had like the Hall of Horrors or something like that, and it was people like Hitler and Napoleon in the prison, like the jail area. And my sister just burst into tears, and we just like, my dad had to sort of scoop her up bodyguard style and just run through like to get her out. And like,
oh man,
why is she crying? It's just Hitler, you know.
She hates Napoleon. She's always hated Napoleon.
Can't watch Bill and Ted. Can't watch it.
It's because she fears small people.
Yeah.
Oh, and that was excellent.
There are just a couple more little points that I wanted to kind of...
Sure.
One of them is very slightly historic as well, about how perhaps the story came about, because obviously, you know, is the story real or is it just folklore or not? So the term Sony is apparently the precursor to jock. So you know how we get called jocks, mainly by the English.
Yeah.
By English people, I should say. The English makes it seem bad. But yeah, so apparently Sony is the precursor to that. So much like Paddy is to Irish people. So a bit of a derogatory term in a way. I'd never heard of that before, so I thought that's why I'd throw that out there. The story could have been made up by English storytellers during the time of the Jacobites to show the Scots as being evil people, because the first sort of time that the story started to properly evolve was in about 1775, which is just a few years after the Jacobite rebellions.
I can totally see that.
I mean, propaganda is what it is.
Yeah.
The second point and the last point is, has anyone seen The Hills Have Eyes? The Wes Craven film. The Hills Have Eyes is based on the story of Sony Bean. Wes Craven got the idea from the story of Sony Bean.
Yeah, I never put two and two together, but that makes a lot of sense.
I wouldn't know.
Interesting.
I don't watch horror films, so I'm the type of person that still finds like the real Ghostbusters cartoon scary.
There's some scary moments in that, to be fair. That's very, very interesting. I wouldn't be surprised if it is propaganda.
I think it's quite likely. I think there was a couple of articles that I was reading, and one was basically saying it was definitely propaganda, as all articles tend to say. So there's one that was like, this is definitely anti-Scottish propaganda from the English, and then there was another one that was like, no, that's utter bullshit. The story is the story. The story came from Scotland and all that. So if we're going on the basis that Scotland invents everything, then Scotland invented the story of Sony Bean. So
I don't know if we want to claim this one, but okay, sure.
I don't know. We've claimed some pretty weird stories in our time. So
I mean, we just discovered that we did invent The Hills Have Eyes and Wes Craven's career. So
and by that extension, horror movies probably.
Yeah,
right?
probably.
Yeah.
Checks out.
Okay, so last and probably least, Chris, what have you got spooky-wise?
Yeah, well,
I'm already very scared, so...
I want to give hat tip to you three for presenting your stories in three unique but lovely ways. Mine, if it feels like mine has been pulled together at the last minute, then that's the effect I was going for. And if it feels like it's just me reading a bunch of newspaper clippings, that was also the effect that I was going for.
Stylistic choice, I like it. Thanks for that.
Yeah, well, I'm a journalist, so that's why I'm doing this. It's stuff that feels sort of slightly factually inaccurate, but also, you also think like, he might be right. He might be on something.
This is exactly how Stephen King writes his novels. So
I really love a story that starts with a disclaimer.
I mean, I just want to set your expectations right. No, to be fair, this one's actually quite a famous one from what I can tell.
Have you guys heard of Casper?
Have you guys heard when there's something strange in the neighborhoods? No, well, okay. First off, we all know Greyfriars Church, Greyfriars Kirk, yeah? And what do we think of when we think of that?
Bobby.
Yeah, okay. So this is the story about how that dog got massacred.
Oh, God.
No,
why do you do this?
It's not.
Please don't listen to this story after just watching like the 1950s film Greyfriars Bobby.
A lovely, lovely film.
This is my favorite thing about this whole story, that it's associated with this loyal dog, and then it's got this horrific poltergeist that I guess lives at the other end of the kirk. So this is about the Greyfriars Kirk poltergeist, or the Mackenzie Poltergeist, which, just to give you a bit of background, so in 17th century Scotland, there was a very intense religious struggle that was ignited when King Charles introduced the Common Book of Prayer and declared that all opposition to the book was an act of treason. So the person that he basically put in charge of this was a lawyer called George Mackenzie, and he was, basically responsible for putting the opposition down. And if you remember the stories about the
Common Book of Prayer, are you just talking about the Bible? What are you talking about?
That's a great question, Rory, and you've really put me in the spot there when it comes to my...
I shouldn't have asked the question, I'm sorry.
No, I believe the Common Bible is the King James Bible, isn't it? So I don't know what the difference is between the Common Book of Prayer and that, but it's probably a slight... Owen, perhaps you know?
No.
I think the Common Book of Prayer is prayers is not the same as the Bible. It's actual prayers that people use, I think.
Okay. So if you can't think of your own...
I'm sure you're right there that it's about prayers rather than the Bible. So I guess it's a little bit like the McCarthy when it came to the communism in the US in the 1950s. He was basically kind of given the rule of, chasing after people that didn't believe in this. So he quickly earned a reputation as one of the most vicious persecutors of the so-called Covenanters, who are the people that rose up and signed this thing called the National Covenant in 1638. So Mackenzie was just known for being an absolute bastard, and his nickname was Bloody Mackenzie. And he imprisoned multiple thousands of Covenanters in a section of the Greyfriars Kirkyard in Edinburgh, and he delighted in torturing them. The guards were allowed to beat the shit out of the Covenanters, and eventually their heads would decorate the spiked gate.
What a dick.
Yeah, he's got anger issues. Now, if you're someone that kind of believes in the occult and the afterlife, this was a bad decision now. After his death, Mackenzie was entombed in a mausoleum in the Greyfriars Kirkyard, which is the exact same graveyard where he prosecuted those who resisted the law. So imagine, imprisoning everyone and then just building a mansion beside the prison. That's kind of what happened. So, but, nothing happens for hundreds of years. And then, this is the thing I like about this story, that it's a relatively new ghost story. In 1999, a homeless man tries to seek shelter in this mausoleum. And I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of it, but it's a black mausoleum. It's got locks on it. Looks like a difficult thing to break into. It's out of central casting for haunted mausoleum.
Yeah, super gothic. Yeah.
Yeah. So homeless man breaks into it. God knows what he's doing in there, but he falls through the floor. And the kind of folklore is that then kind of sets something off. Or escapes a spirit or whatever. And then more recently in 2004, a couple of teenagers broke into the tomb and apparently removed a number of unidentified remains, even beheading a corpse and using the skull like a hand puppet.
This all checks out so far.
I think if I remember correctly, the skull was actually Bloody Mackenzie's skull. If I remember reading that correctly, I think that was the case.
Well, it went to court, and you probably have read it, and I think they got done on a thing about, desecrating a corpse or whatever. But basically, if you're kind of reading between the lines, that means that Bloody Mackenzie's spirit has been awoken, and he's really, really not happy with any of this. So I think this all kind of kicks off in 1999, and the 2004 thing is sort of an incidental, this happens later. But over the years, since then, there's been hundreds of reports of attacks by what is now known as the Mackenzie Poltergeist. So I was reading an article earlier today that was dated in June of this year. Edinburgh does a whole bunch of ghost tours.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There was a manager that said that people email me to let us know what happened to them in the tours. Some say they've got scratches, bite marks, bruises, and burns that they can't explain. One guest on a tour around the graveyard claims that he was attacked. Another one said that he needed to treat painful scratches, which he insists must have been inflicted by this ghost.
You sure it wasn't like an army of school children chasing down a vampire by any chance?
I mean, it could just be... I was trying to think of a reasonable explanation for this, and maybe the homeless guy falling through the floor sets off some kind of weird gas leak or something like that. I don't know, but the quotes in it are quite vivid, and this guy says, "My back was covered in livid, burning red scratches. When I took pictures and sent it to my friends, they were freaked out. It was demonic. What happened to me can't be explained in any other way." Another guy says that he went on a ghost tour there, and he was the only one that went because all of his friends were too scared. And he says, "I went on my own because all my friends were too scared to go with me, and it was spooky. And he didn't notice anything untoward until he got a taxi back to his hotel. And he said, I was about to go to bed when I felt burning on my back. I took my t-shirt off and looked in the mirror. That's when I saw the scratches. I was stunned. The scratches were burning. I put tea tree oil on my back to try to take the pain away. By morning, scratches had turned into welts, and the skin was broken in several places, and my back was bleeding." And it's
sounds horrifying.
Yeah, and it gets stranger. So, in November 1999, Colin Grant, who's a minister of a church, this was kind of after, the homeless guy had fallen through and this kind of becoming a thing. He stood in the kirkyard and he performed an exorcism. he said he stood in front of the local press with a candle and a cross to ward off evil spirits, holding a Bible in his right hand, and he claimed he'd finally cast out the spirits that had been trapped in the graveyard for centuries. But as the ritual drew to a close, a dark shape was witnessed gliding across a window in the church, even though it was locked and there was nobody else inside.
Ooh.
Spooky.
And then the exorcism apparently didn't work. And on January 26th, not long after he expressed fears that his work would kill him, the Reverend died from a heart attack while speaking to the spirit world during a seance.
Wow.
I mean, that sounds... I don't want to victim blame here, but that's... I mean, bit of that's on him.
I think he's...
You're going to prod the hornet's nest.
He's prodded. He's prodded.
He's really prodded it.
I don't know, like, having a seance surrounded by these, like, spooky ghosts and poltergeists, it just seems like a mistake to me.
Yeah, oh, I agree, especially because you're known as the guy that got rid of the poltergeist. But, like, I didn't know about this, and I know that Edinburgh ghost tours are famous, but I didn't know that it was a thing that you go to this kirkyard and you leave and you're covered in bruises.
I think you're right. It's very, very interesting, the fact that this started in like 1999. That this is, for all intents and purposes, a modern ghost story. Like, that's rare these days.
I like the idea in my head that it's actually the ghost of Greyfriars Bobby, and he just keeps jumping up on you and scratching you.
It would explain the bite marks as well.
Yeah.
He's just a poor boy. He's such a good boy.
He's such a good dog.
I know. You just need to throw a ghost ball for him, and he'll be happy.
But yeah, no, I really got into. I went down a bit of a rabbit hole looking at that stuff today. After kind of a panic of, oh shit, what am I going to talk about here? And pretty cool ghost story.
Yeah.
I've been there. I've been there, but I had no idea that they had a poltergeist. I only know Greyfriars Bobby. That's the only story I know. But that's cool.
Yeah, I think they're all good ghost stories.
Super spooky. Well, I mean, this was... I'm gonna have nightmares tonight. I don't know about you boys.
I have nightmares every night. It's fine.
Well, that's what you get for only paying attention to Scottish history. It's all horrifying stuff. So yeah,
I've always said, regardless, whenever I talk about history, specifically Scottish history, there is no happy ending. Like, regardless of what story you tell from Scottish history, there is no happy ending whatsoever. Either it ends in death, or horrific death, or even more death.
And if you're lucky, you turn into a spooky ghost who haunts a graveyard and scratches people in the back.
Yeah.
Or get hunted down by Ouija teenagers.
Tiny children.
I do remember listening. I think I heard like another podcast talking about that particular story, and that was freaking me out. That, like, I genuinely think that could be a plausible, like, if there was any of the stories which I've heard, I would say that's probably the most plausible one of them all.
The Greyfriars.
The bloody Mackenzie Covenanters prison.
Not the women with the really
pendulum.
I believe there are many women out there with pendulum breasts, but I think
there was a lot more to that story. You boys are just focusing on one small aspect of that.
Two long aspects.
Yes, it was a long aspect, but there's a lot more to that story. And if you want to hear it, go to the Scottish History podcast and download the first half of this episode.
They've already gone. We told them. They've been there.
They've deleted this.
Oh, yeah,
it's done. It's done. This doesn't exist.
Thanks, readers.
Thank you to our loyal readers.
So I've got a quick wee question for you as well. Do you
Sure.
guys have any like specific Halloween traditions that you carry out? Is there like, because like in the lead up to Christmas, everyone's got their own little traditions. See, I really love movies and stuff like that. And I never really get to talk about it much on my own podcast. I usually mention a movie and then that's it. But it's unusual for me to actually get the chance to speak to people. Have you got any like Halloween traditions, any specific movies or anything like that you like to set yourself in the mood for?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Yeah, I'm a big horror movie fan, so this is my excuse to watch as many as possible. There's no real like annual one that I have to watch to get me in the mood, but it's just like whatever's new, whatever's interesting, and then I'll dip back into something that I've maybe not watched in a wee while. Like Johnny and I spoke about Scottish films on our last episode, and I was talking about Wicker Man and Dog Soldiers, which are both Scottish based, or like horror movies based in Scotland, I should say. So yeah, that's what I like to do. What about you boys?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure I have any traditions for Halloween, really. I mean, I definitely we did a lot of it when I was very young, and then it's interesting coming to America because it's so huge here, actually, Halloween. Like, you just see everyone getting dressed up, and actually you kind of, I found we were sort of saying it before we started recording, but there's this sort of recalibration of your mind, because Thanksgiving is this enormous thing in the States, and like we didn't really celebrate that in the UK or in Scotland growing up. And actually I think this run from kind of now to the end of the year, I think is really lovely here, where you kind of hit Halloween, there's this sort of run into Thanksgiving, people are kind of get warmed up, and then it's the end of the year and Christmas and everything else. And I mean, for me, like the traditions wise, I end up going home and watching stupid things like The Thick of It once I'm back in the UK, because it's on UK Netflix. And for American listeners, I think the closest thing is sort of Veep, I guess, Veep, where it's a kind of like comedic take on politics. But I don't know about movies, actually. What about you, Chris?
Well, the nice thing about the place that I live in, Hoboken, New Jersey, is that they take Halloween really seriously around here. So it's nice to go around the streets and kind of see the outdoor displays of, like, they really go all out, and they have enormous spiders and skeletons and all sorts of stuff. Skeletons. They got tons of skeletons. It's really scary. And yeah, and then I don't know. I'm not like Rory. I've never really been massively into horror films, but I watch a good. Like we watched The Addams Family the other night. Like we watched the cartoon version of The Addams Family just to give it a go. That just came out recently. By the way, it's nowhere near as good as the real Addams Family. Yeah, my wife is a very festive person and gets into Halloween, but then it like starts accelerating and is very into Thanksgiving and very into Christmas. So it all becomes about like the movies that you tick off every year. And like I say, yeah, just dressing up the dog and the kid in costumes.
I do think the decorations here, like the stuff on houses and gardens and everything, is amazing. Like I was up the East Coast last week, up towards Cape Cod, and I saw this one that was in someone's garden. They basically said it was as if like someone had parachuted out of a plane and landed in the tree. So it was just like the parachute in the tree, and so like this sort of like body hanging underneath it. It was like,
I saw one of those the other day. Actually, it's hilarious.
Are you sure that wasn't a terrible accident, Johnny, and you just drove past it?
I mean, I haven't seen anything in the news so far, so I think I'm good.
Okay.
So there's a guy just sort of hanging up in a tree going, help me, please.
One car's gone past in the last week.
What about you?
I'll take a photo.
You got any traditions?
No, Halloween's not really something that, like, I think it's mentioned earlier, I'm a big softie, and, like, I'm a huge Ghostbusters fan, though. Like, there's three films that I could, actually, no, we'll go four. There's 4 films that I could watch every day for the rest of my life. Never, ever, ever get sick of them. Ghostbusters, Back to the Future, Die Hard, and Monty Python and the Holy Grail. If I only ever had those 4 films to watch for the rest of my life, I'd be happy. So on like Facebook, I'm on a couple of these Ghostbusters groups. A lot of the guys on them are obviously from America and Canada and stuff like that. And seeing some of these like Ghostbuster displays is amazing. I think though, like especially in the UK this year, Halloween's gonna be pushed further than I think it's ever been pushed before, because obviously with the lockdown, COVID and all of that, people have got more time in order to do things. Like even last night, so for obviously those in your podcast don't really know me, I'm basically just a history guy. I'm just a normal guy, but I just read loads of books about Scottish history, and I love history in general. But my actual job, I'm a milkman. I work night shift delivering milk. And so last night, I'm running around. I'm doing a milk run I'd never done before, so I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm having a really bloody stressful time of it. And I'm wandering up this garden, and I've got the torch in my mouth because I'm carrying like so many glass bottles of milk at the same time. And then like I just catch this thing at the side of my eye and move the torch around in my mouth, and there's just this skeleton coming out the ground. And I'm like, oh no, I forgot that Halloween's going to be big this year. So I think in the UK, Halloween's going to be a lot bigger than it has been for a number of years, because even during the summer, the amount of home improvements that people were doing, I've just got this feeling that Halloween's going to be massive here this year. And I'm totally jealous.
Right. I think you're probably right. I think it's probably like people can't go out to like, a Halloween party or a Halloween event, or like in your case that you were telling us earlier about your Halloween gig. So they're just going to bring it more to home.
Yeah.
So they're going to decorate their houses, which is not quite the tradition as much at home in Scotland as it is here in the US. So yeah, I think you're probably right. You're probably going to see more decorations and more people kind of making a bit of an effort there, which is
I think
should be fun.
Even over the last few years, even just the decorations at Christmas have got even more extravagant and wild than they ever have been before as well. So yeah.
Owen, seeing as you're the guest on our show, do you want to do our ending?
I would be honoured.
Owen, take it away.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, guys. Hope to do it again soon. This'll do, lads. This'll do nicely.
Nice.
Cracking. Hello, thanks for listening everybody. Just a couple more things. Please don't forget to subscribe and review the podcast on iTunes and Spotify and all other podcasting apps. You can email us at thistledonicelypod@gmail.com. Visit the website thistledonicelypod.com. Visit us on Twitter at thistledopod. All original music in this podcast is written and performed by our very own Johnny Naismith. Please like and subscribe to his YouTube channel and follow him on Instagram at JAW_KNEE_. Loves, hugs and kisses from the Thistle Do Nicely pod.
Thank you so much for listening to this one. If you want to follow the Scottish History Podcast, you can do so at facebook.com/ScotHistoryPod, on Twitter at ScotHistoryPod, and on Instagram at instagram.com/ScotHistoryPod. You can find a link to all of these and all of the new episodes on www.scotthistorypod.com. Thank you very much.